Hello, everybody. I am Mrs. Poppet, and this is my place. I'm so happy to see that you've come back for another story time today. Today's story has lots of adventure in it, and I think you're going to like it very much. Have you ever heard of the story of the two brothers? Well, if you have, you'll get to hear it again, and if you haven't, you'll hear it right now. The Two Brothers. Once upon a time, there were two brothers. One was rich, and the other poor. The rich one was a goldsmith, but he was black at heart. The poor one was a broom maker, and was good and honorable. The poor one had twin sons, who were as like each other as two drops of water. The twin boys often dropped by their rich uncle's house to get scraps of food to eat. One day, when the poor man was going into the forest to fetch brushwood, he saw a golden bird that was more beautiful than any bird he had ever seen before. He picked up a small stone, threw it at the bird, and managed to hit it, but only one golden feather fell to the ground, and then the bird flew away. The man took the feather to his rich brother, the goldsmith, who looked at it and said, "It is pure gold!" and gave him a great deal of money for it. The next day the poor broom maker climbed into a birch tree to cut some branches, when the same bird flew out. He found a nest that had a golden egg in it. He took the egg and showed it to his brother, who again said, "It is pure gold!" and gave him what it was worth. The rich goldsmith said, "I would like to have the bird itself." So the poor brother went into the forest, and this time when he saw the golden bird, he was able to throw a stone and bring it down. He carried it to his wealthy brother, who gave him a great heap of gold for it. The goldsmith knew what kind of bird this was. He called his wife and said, "Roast me the golden bird, and take care that none of it is lost. I must eat it all myself." The bird was magical, you see, so whoever ate its heart and liver would find a piece of gold beneath their pillow every morning. The woman made the bird ready, put it on the spit, and let it roast. But then, when she stepped out of the kitchen, the broom maker's twin sons ran in. They turned the spit once or twice, and 2 bits of the bird fell into the dripping tin. One of the boys said, "Let's eat these little bits. I'm so hungry, no one will ever miss them." They ate them, and the goldsmith's wife came back into the kitchen and saw that they were chewing. She realized they must have eaten the bird's heart and liver, and was frightened her husband would be angry. She quickly killed a young cock, took out its heart and liver, and put them beside the golden bird. When it was roasted, she carried it to the goldsmith, who ate it all himself, leaving nothing. The next morning, however, when he felt beneath his pillow, expecting to bring out a piece of gold, there were no more gold pieces than there had ever been. But when the 2 children woke up, something fell rattling to the ground, and they found 2 gold pieces. They took them to their father, who was astonished. The next morning they found 2 more, and then again every day. The broom maker went to his brother and told him of these coins strangely appearing. The goldsmith knew at once how it must have come about, and he was envious and hard-hearted, and said to his brother, "Your children are in league with the devil. Do not take the gold, and do not let them live in your house any longer, or the evil will invade you too." The broom maker was frightened. So painful as it was to him, he led the twins deep into the forest, and with a sad heart he left them there. The twin brothers searched for the way home, but they just became more lost. At last they met a huntsman, who said, "Whose children do you belong to?" "We are the poor broom maker's sons," they replied, and they told him that their father would not keep them in the house any longer because a piece of gold lay under their pillows every morning. "Come," said the huntsman, "that's not such a bad fate, as long as you keep honest and are not idle." He was a good man, who liked children and had none of his own. So he took them home with him and said, "I will be your father and bring you up until you have grown enough not to need me." They learnt hunting from him, and he kept the pieces of gold that arrived each morning in a case should they need them in the future. When the twins were grown up, the huntsman took them into the forest and said, "Today, if you make your trial shot, I can release you from your apprenticeship and make you huntsmen." He pointed at a covey of wild geese flying in the form of a triangle, and he said, "Shoot down one from each corner." Each of the boys accomplished this, and the huntsman said, "You are skilled huntsmen. Your apprenticeship is over." The brothers thought together and then asked him, "We have now learned the finishing learning, but we must prove ourselves in the world. Allow us to go away and travel." This pleased their foster father, who said, "You talk like brave men. What you ask for has always been my wish for you. Go, and your courage will be rewarded." When they set out, the huntsman presented each of them with a gun, a dog, and their saved up gold pieces. When saying goodbye, he gave them a bright knife and said, "If you ever separate, stick this knife into a tree at the place where you part. And then, if one of you returns to it, he will be able to see how his brother is faring. For the side of the knife which is turned in the direction of the brother that went will rust if he dies, but will remain bright as long as he is alive." The two brothers walked on together through a great forest. After 2 days they had eaten everything from their hunting pouches. They said, "We must shoot something or we will go hungry," and they loaded their guns. When a hare came running towards them, they took aim, but the hare cried, "Dear huntsman, if you let me live, 2 little ones to you I'll give." It sprang into the thicket and brought back 2 baby hares. But the little creatures played so merrily and were so pretty, the huntsmen could not find it in their hearts to kill them. So they kept them, and the little hares jumped along beside them as they walked. Soon after this, a fox crept into their path. They were just going to shoot it when it cried, "Dear huntsman, if you let me live, 2 little ones to you I'll give." The fox too brought 2 little foxes, and the huntsman did not want to kill them either, so like the hare, they followed behind. It wasn't long before a wolf strove out in the bushes. The huntsman made ready to shoot it, but the wolf cried, "Dear huntsman, if you let me live, 2 little ones to you I'll give." The huntsman put the 2 little wolves beside the other baby animals, and they followed along too. Then a bear came, and to save its own life added 2 young bears to the twin brothers' procession. Finally a lion came and tossed his mane, and he too swapped 2 cubs to keep his life. Now the twin huntsmen had 2 lions, 2 bears, 2 wolves, 2 foxes, and 2 hares who followed them and served them. They were still hungry, but the crafty foxes knew where there was a village, and there the brothers exchanged their gold coins for food for them and the animals. They traveled on like this from village to village. After they had traveled for many months and had found no place where they could settle together, they agreed to part and try their luck in the world independently. They divided the animals so each of them had a lion, a bear, a wolf, a fox, and a hare. They said goodbye, promised to love each other like brothers until death, and stuck the knife that their foster father had given them into a tree. Then one went east and the other went west. The twin who went west arrived with his animals in a town that was hung with black. A villager explained that the next day their king's only daughter was to die. The wandering twin asked, "Is she very ill?" "No," answered the villager, "she is vigorous and healthy. Nevertheless, she must die. Outside the town there is a high hill, and on it lives a dragon that must eat a beautiful girl every year, or he destroys the whole country. Now all the girls have been given to him. There's no one left except for the king's daughter. She must be given to him, and it must be done tomorrow." The huntsman asked, "Why doesn't someone kill the dragon?" "Many knights have tried," replied the villager, "but it's cost all of them their lives. The king has promised that he who conquers the dragon will marry his daughter and will govern the kingdom after his death." The huntsman said nothing more to this, but the next morning he took his animals and climbed the dragon's hill. A little church stood at the top of it, and on the altar stood 3 full cups with the inscription, "Whoever empties these cups will become the strongest man on earth, and will be able to wield the sword buried at the door of the church." The huntsman drank from the cups and became so strong his hand could quite easily wield the heavy sword he found there. An hour came when the princess was to be delivered to the dragon. From afar she saw the huntsman on the hill and thought it was the dragon waiting for her. She did not want to go, but because the whole town would have been destroyed, she was forced to make the miserable journey. The king and courtiers returned home full of grief, but the king's marshal was told to stand and watch from a distance. When the king's daughter got to the top of the hill, it was not the dragon who stood there, but the young huntsman, who comforted her and said he would save her. He led her into the church and locked her in. It was not long before the 7-headed dragon arrived, roaring. Seeing the huntsman, he was astonished and said, "Many dragons have left their lives here. I shall soon make an end of you too." And he breathed fire from his 7 jaws. The fire was intended to light the dry grass, suffocating the huntsman in the heat and smoke, but his animals came rushing and trampled out the flames. The dragon rushed towards the huntsman, but he swung his sword until it sang through the air. He struck off 3 of the 7 heads. The dragon became furious and rose up in the air, spitting flames over the huntsman. But the huntsman once more drew out his sword and cut off another 3 heads. The monster became faint, but was just able to rush at the huntsman. With his last strength, the huntsman only managed to slice its tail off. But the animals came running and tore what was left of the dragon to pieces. When the fight was over, the huntsman unlocked the church. He found the king's daughter lying on the floor as if she had fainted with fear. He showed her the dragon all cut to pieces and told her that she was saved. She rejoiced and said, "Now you will be my dearest husband." She took off her coral necklace and made collars to reward all of the huntsman's animals. She gave her handkerchief embroidered with her name to the huntsman. He went and cut the tongues from the dragon's 7 heads and wrapped them in the handkerchief and preserved them carefully. The huntsman was so weary from battle that he said to the princess, "We are both exhausted. Let's rest for a while." She agreed, and the huntsman said to the lion, "You keep watch so that no one surprises us in our sleep." The lion was also weary from the fight, so he called to the bear and said, "Lie down near me. I must sleep a little. Wake me if anything comes." The bear was also tired and called the wolf, saying, "I must sleep a little, but if anything comes, wake me." The wolf called the fox and said, "If anything comes, wake me." The fox told the hare to wake him, but the hare was tired too and had no one who he could call to watch him, and he fell asleep. So now the king's daughter, the huntsman, the lion, the bear, the wolf, the fox, and the hare were all sound asleep. The marshal, who'd been told by the king to watch from a distance, took courage, and when he did not see the dragon fly away with the princess, and the hill was quiet, he climbed to the top. There lay the dragon, hacked and hewn to bits on the ground, and nearby were the king's daughter and the huntsman with his animals, and all of them were fast asleep. The marshal was wicked and godless. He took his sword, cut off the huntsman's head, seized the princess in his arms, and carried her down the hill. She woke and was terrified, and the marshal said he would kill her if she did not obey him, and promised to say it was he who had killed the dragon. He took her to the king, who was overjoyed when he saw his dear child alive. The marshal said, "I have killed the dragon and saved the princess and the whole kingdom. I demand to marry her as you promised." The king said to the princess, "Is what he says true?" "It must indeed be true," she answered, "but I will not consent to be married until a year and a day have passed." She hoped in that time to hear something of the dear huntsman. The animals still laying asleep beside their dead master on the dragon's hill, the hare awoke first and roused the fox, and the fox the wolf, and the wolf the bear, and the bear the lion. And when the lion woke and saw the princess was gone and his master was dead, he began to roar frightfully, "Roar!" and said, "Who has done this? Bear, why didn't you wake me?" The bear asked the wolf, "Why didn't you wake me?" And the wolf asked the fox, and the fox asked the hare. The poor hare did not know what to say, and the blame rested with him. They were all going to pounce on him, but he said, "Don't kill me. I know how we can bring our master back to life. There is a mountain where a root grows which can cure every illness and any wound." They let him go, and a day later he was back with the root. The lion put the huntsman's head on his body again, and the hare placed the root by the wound, and immediately the two united back. He woke and was alarmed when he did not see the princess. He thought, "She must have crept away while I was sleeping to get rid of me." The lion, in his great haste, had put his master's head on the wrong way around. But the huntsman didn't notice because of all his unhappy thoughts about the princess. Then at noon, when he went to eat something, he saw that his head was turned backwards and could not understand it. The lion explained that they had all slept and his head had been cut off, but they had cured the wound with a magic root, and that in his haste he had held the head in the wrong way, but that he would soon repair the mistake. He tore the huntsman's head off again, turned it around, and the hare healed it again with the root. The huntsman was sad at heart. He traveled off again around the world. It came to pass that precisely at the end of 1 year he came back to the same town where he had saved the king's daughter from the dragon. This time the town was brightly hung with red. He asked a villager what it meant, and the villager replied, "Last year our king's daughter was delivered to a dragon, but the marshal fought it and killed it, and so tomorrow their wedding is to be celebrated. That is why the town is covered with red cloth today, for joy." The huntsman stayed at the inn in town. The next day when the wedding was to take place, he said to the innkeeper, "Do you believe, sir host, that today I shall eat bread from the king's own table?" "Nah," answered the host, "I would bet 100 pieces of gold that will not come true." The huntsman accepted the wager and set against it a purse with just the same number of gold pieces. Then he called to the hare and said, "Go, my dear runner, and fetch me some of the bread that the king is eating." The hare ran to the palace and under the chair of the king's daughter and scratched at her foot. She peeped down, and she knew the hare by the collar she had made from her coral necklace. She picked him up and carried him into her chamber and said, "Dear hare, what do you want?" He answered, My master who killed the dragon is here, and he has sent me to ask for a loaf of bread, just like the king eats." And the princess was full of joy, and ordered a baker to bring a loaf like those eaten by the king. The hare got on its hind legs, took the loaf in his front paws, and carried it to his master. Then the huntsman said, "Behold, innkeeper, the 100 pieces of gold are mine." The innkeeper was astonished, but the huntsman went on to say, "Yes, sir, I have the bread, but now I will likewise have some of the king's roast meat." The host said, "I should indeed like to see that," but he would make no more wagers. The huntsman called the fox and said, "My little fox, go and fetch me some roast meat, just like the king eats." The fox ran to the palace and seated himself under the king's daughter's chair, and she recognized him by his little collar. He said to her, "My master who killed the dragon is here, and he has sent me. I'm asking for some roast meat like the king is eating." Then she ordered the cook to prepare a roast joint just like the king's. The fox took the dish, waved away the flies, and carried it to his master. "Behold, sir," the huntsman said, "bread and meat Here, but now I will also have proper vegetables with it, like those eaten by the king." Then he sent the wolf to fetch vegetables just like the king eats, and the princess arranged for the wolf to have the vegetables. Next the huntsman sent the bear to bring back some sweet pastry, just like the king was eating, and then the lion to find wine just like that was drunk by the king. The princess recognized each animal by its collar and met all their requests. Finally the huntsman said, "Behold, sir, here I have bread, meat, vegetables, sweet pastry, and wine, just like the king has. And now I will dine with my animals." They all ate and drank, and he was joyful, for he knew that the king's daughter still loved him. The innkeeper was so astonished that all had arrived, and glad he had not made any further bets. Now the king said to the daughter at the royal table, "What did all the wild animals want which have been coming to you, and going in and out of my palace?" She replied, "I may not tell you, but you would do well to send for the master of these animals." The king sent a servant to the inn and invited the stranger to the palace. The king went to meet the huntsman and let him in. His animals followed. The king gave him a seat near himself and his daughter, and the marshal, as bridegroom, sat on the other side, but he didn't recognize the huntsman. At this very moment, the 7 heads of the dragon were brought in to impress the court. The king declared, "These 7 heads were cut off the dragon by the marshal, which is why he is marrying my daughter." But the huntsman stood up and opened the 7 dragons' mouths and said, "Where are the tongues?" Then the marshal was terrified and grew pale and didn't know what to answer. At length, in his anguish, he said, "Dragons don't have tongues." The huntsman said, "Liars ought not to have tongues, but dragons' tongues are the prize of the one who slays it." And he unfolded the handkerchief he carried, and there lay all 7 tongues. He put each tongue into the dragon's mouth to which it belonged, and they fit exactly. Then he took the handkerchief on which the princess's name was embroidered and showed it to her and asked who she had given it to. She replied, "To he who killed the dragon." And then he called to his animals, took the collar off each of them, and asked the princess who the jewels belonged to. She answered, "I divided them among the animals who helped conquer the dragon." Then the huntsman declared, "When I was resting, tired from the fight, the marshal came and cut off my head. Then he carried away the king's daughter and claimed it was he who had killed the dragon. But he lied. I proved this with the tongues, the handkerchief, and the necklace collars." He told how his animals had healed him using a wonderful root. The king asked his daughter, "Is this true? Is this the man who killed the dragon?" She answered, "Yes, it is true. I can reveal the wicked deed of the marshal now that it has come to light without my telling. He made me promise to be silent. This is why I made the condition that the marriage should be delayed for a year and a day." The king summoned 12 counselors to pronounce judgment on the marshal, and they sentenced him to be torn to pieces by 4 bulls. Then the king gave his daughter to the huntsman and named him his ruler over the whole kingdom. The wedding was celebrated with great joy. The young king invited his father, the broom maker, and his foster father, the huntsman, and loaded them with treasures. The young king and queen were thoroughly happy and lived cheerfully together. The young king, though, was still a huntsman. He often went out hunting, and the faithful animals accompanied him. There was a forest nearby that was reported to be haunted. The young king was riding past it when he saw a snow-white deer and said to his servants, "Wait here until I return. I must chase that beautiful creature." And it disappeared into the forest after it and followed only by his animals. His servants waited until evening, then they rode home and told the young queen that the king had followed a white hart and disappeared into the enchanted forest. The young king kept getting near enough to the deer to take aim, only to have it bound away into the far distance. Eventually it vanished altogether, and he was lost, deep in the forest with night falling. He lit a fire near a tree, but then heard a groan, "Ugh," from above. When he looked up, there was an old woman sitting in the tree saying, "Oh, oh, oh, how cold I am." "Come down and warm yourself," he said. But she said, "No, your animals will bite me." He answered, "They will do you no harm, old woman. Do come down." But the old woman was really a witch, and she said, "I will throw down a wand from the tree, and if you strike them on the back with it, they will do me no harm." He touched his animals with her wand, and they were instantly turned into stone. Now the witch was safe from the animals. She leapt down and touched the young king with the wand and turned him into stone. Then she laughed, "Ha ha!" and dragged him and the animals into the vault, where many more stones were lying. When the young king still did not come back, the young queen became more and more worried. It so happened that this very time the young king's twin brother came into the kingdom. He had not settled, but had traveled here and there with his animals. Then it occurred to him to go look at the knife in the tree. He might learn how his twin brother was. His brother's side of the knife was half rusted and half bright. He thought, "A great misfortune must have fallen my brother, but perhaps I can still save him," for half the knife was still bright. He and his animals traveled to his brother's direction, and when he reached the town gate, a guard came to meet him and asked, "Shall I announce you to the young queen? For she has spent days in the greatest sorrow, afraid you were killed in the enchanted forest." The twin realized the guard thought he was his brother, who must be a young king, and he thought, "If I pass myself off as him, I will fit in here, and then perhaps I can rescue him more easily." So he allowed the guard to escort him into the castle, where he was received with great joy. The young queen thought that this was her husband, and asked him why he had stayed away so long. He said he had not been able to find his way out of the forest. At night he was taken to the royal bed, but he laid a two-edged sword between the young queen and himself. She didn't know what this meant, but didn't dare ask. He remained in the palace for 2 days and asked about everything relating to the enchanted forest. At last he said, "I must hunt there at once." The young queen and her father, the king, tried to persuade him not to, but he was determined. When he got to the forest, he had the same experience as his brother. He saw a snow-white deer and said to his hunting companions, "Stay here and wait until I return. I must chase that lovely beast." But he could not overtake the deer, and got so deep into the forest that he was forced to pass the night there. He lit a fire and heard someone above him groaning about the cold. Looking up, he saw the witch and invited her to warm herself down by the fire. She asked him to touch his animals with her wand so she needn't fear them, but with this request he realized she must be a witch. He tried to shoot, but lead bullets could not harm her. She laughed, "Ha ha!" and cried out, "You cannot hit me!" At this the huntsman tore 3 silver buttons off his coat and loaded his gun with them. Her magic was useless against the silver, and she fell to the ground with a scream. He set his foot on her and said, "Old witch, if you do not instantly confess where my brother is, I will seize you with both my hands and throw you into the fire." The witch was frightened and said, He and his animals lie in a vault turned to stone." The twin brother forced her to bring all the stones in the vault back to life again. There stood the young king with his animals, and many others arose too, merchants, artisans, and shepherds. They thanked the twin brother for saving them and went to their homes. When the brothers saw each other again, they embraced and rejoiced with all their hearts. They threw the witch on the fire, and with her death, the forest opened up to be light and clear, and the king's palace could be seen in the distance, only a 3-hour walk away. The 2 brothers headed there, and on the way they told each other their stories. The young king explained that he was ruler of the whole country, and his brother observed, Yes, I saw this. When I went to town, they thought I was you. All the royal honors were paid to me. The young queen looked on me as her husband and had me eat at her side and sleep in your bed." When the other heard that, he became so jealous and angry that he drew his sword and struck off his brother's head. But when he saw him lying there dead, he was deeply sorry. "My brother saved me," he cried, "and I have killed him for it." And he wailed out loud. Then his hare offered to bring some of the root of life. He bounded off and fetched it while there was still time, and the dead man was brought back to life again. The twin brothers and their animals entered the palace together. The king said to his daughters, "Each of them looks exactly like the other. Say which is your husband, for I cannot tell." Then she was in great distress because she could not tell, but at last she remembered the collars she had given to the animals. She found the golden clasp on the lion and cried in delight, "He who is followed by this lion is my true husband." The young king laughed and said, "Yes, I am the right one." And they sat down together and ate and drank and were merry. That night, when the young king came to bed, and his wife said, "Why did you lay the two-edged sword between us these last nights? I thought you were going to kill me." So the young king knew how true his twin brother had been. That was quite an adventure, wasn't it? The story just was amazing. I hope you liked it very much, because I liked it too. And I look forward to our next story time tomorrow. See you then.